The janitor's closet had no window, just a crooked mirror that sliced Naomi Carter into narrow Payne's forehead in one strip, an eye in the next, the elastic cuff of her glove set like a tourniquet. The fluorescent bulb above her clicked once, twice, then surrendered to a steady hum that folded into the building's larger hum, the long, patient respiration of Whitmore Industries after midnight. Somewhere, servers thrummed like distant cicadas. An elevator sigh ascended, held its breath, and slept. The air tasted like toner dust and stale citrus cleaner. All that money, she thought, and the night still smelled like bleach. She tied her hair back, snugged the vacuum's cord around her wrist, and pushed through the door into glass. The 65th floor gleamed like a refrigerated museum. Desks were aquariums, without fish edges on edges, translucence that pretended to be honesty. The city pressed its face against the windows. Neon poured thinly across marble, and the silence had weight. She guided the vacuum between the towering desks. Its motor hummed against the stone like a contralto throat clearing. A dozen branded mugs. Executive Summit. Q3 Offsite. Be Bold sat with coffee rings like eclipses. Abandoned jackets carried the borrowed musk of expensive cologne. Day ruled here. All shoes with authority and laughter that didn't need to listen. Night belonged to the people who reset the stage. Evening. Miss Carter, Frank said, appearing around a corner with his radio on his belt and his lunchbox swinging. Frank's forearms were a storybook, a faded anchor tattoo, a scar that curved like a comma. Evening. Frank, she answered. He was one of the few who didn't look through her as if she were an afterimage. She tipped a wire trash basket and a parcel of paper, slid free a memo printed in 2 columns. English on the left, Korean on the right. The paper was warm, as if the printer hadn't finished letting it go. Naomi's eyes caught a line and held it. The translation used an honorific better suited to addressing a junior than a partner. On the margin, a red correction circled the mistake and made the wrong choice again. She didn't need grammar books to feel the insult. Her grandmother's voice, salt wind from Busan braided into its vowels, murmured from the past. Choose your suffix, like you choose your shoes. Child, don't wear beach sandals to a funeral. She slipped the memo back into the basket and kept moving. Her master's degree in linguistics had gone brittle, framed but not hung, hiding in a box beneath winter coats. The arrest report, disorderly conduct at a language rights protest that got out of hand, had locked her out of glass cities like this one. Still, language lived in her muscles. She had trained herself not to flinch when words were abused. But the flinch came anyway. On nights she was lucky. The executive floor was last. The carpet was plusher there. It let her feet sigh. Tonight, an interior kept burning. The corner office glowed CEO light, and a voice traveled into the hallway like a thrown glass. Damit. Martin, this deal is falling apart. Crisp, expensive impatience. Graham Whitmore. She'd seen the profile in business magazines, a jaw that seemed to have signed something before the rest of his face agreed. 3 years, and we lose it over a translation. Get Park on the line. I don't care if it's midnight in Seoul. Naomi slowed, hands quieting the squeak of her cart's wheel by instinct, like calming a restless child. Daewin Group. The name had lived in her grandmother's mouth like a neighbor's. Daewin, not Daywin, but Daewin, a soft wave against a pier. Naomi rolled past the half-open door, eyes lowered. The meeting room light was cool, surgical. Someone slammed something that wasn't meant to be slammed. She turned the corner and let the corridor swallow her. The executive lounge door yawned on a trash can. Inside, a coffee maker had misfired. Ground scattered like ash. over laminated packets, stamped confidential day-win partnership brief. Coffee had bled into the first pages, leaving brown continents across bullet points. Naomi gathered the sheets onto a dry island of countertop, eyes snagging on the Korean again, words bent into the wrong posture. Respect translated as condescension. Flexibility hardened into dictate. One line deployed conditional futility, where the culture asked for formal possibility. Not catastrophic, collectively, fatal. The lounge door burst open. A man in an expensive suit, missing a comb, stopped short. "Oh, those are mine." He plucked the sodden stack from her hands. Brows knotted. "I was just moving them so they wouldn't." "Just clean it up," he said, already pivoting. Impatience, scoring his fouls, and restock coffee. "We'll be here all night." The door thudded. Naomi steadied the grounds with a wet cloth. She rewound the paper towel like gauze around a wound. Her chest tightened with the familiar sting, visible enough to be ordered, invisible enough to be dismissed. She finished wiping, swapped out filters, restocked cups, and was sweeping the last of the stray grounds when a phone began to ring. Not the black internal phone. Across the room on a small desk by the window, a beige handset blinked a red LED. International Direct Line. It rang with a different rhythm, steadier, objective, like a heartbeat on a monitor. 5, 6, 7. Caller ID. Seoul. She glanced at the shut boardroom. No one came. She put her hand on the receiver. The building hummed. She lifted. "Whitmore Industries," she said, the professional register sliding over her voice like a blazer she could not afford. "Good evening." The reply came in rapid Korean, polite, clipped, the syllables hitting like rain on a tin roof. Naomi caught final opportunity. "Thursday. Respect. Expected. Direct communication." She tried to answer, "We are listening," but the caller exhaled frustration and hung up. The dial tone stretched out like a reprimand. She placed the receiver back into its cradle and stood very still until the room's hum returned to baseline. Then she drew a notepad from the drawer, wrote what she'd understood, folded the page, and slid it into the chest pocket of her uniform. On her way to the elevator, she passed the shred bin, a mouth spilling secrets. She shouldn't. A corner peeped Daewon. Again. In bold, she fished out the uppermost streamers like a thief, fishing minnows from dark water, and tucked them into her pocket beside Seoul's last words. By 2:00 a.m., she was home, 15 miles from the gleaming tower, in an apartment that smelled faintly of dish soap and the kind of basil you grow on a sill because it's cheaper than buying it. She dumped the shredded strips onto her kitchen table and assembled them like a crime scene puzzle. Long edges, aligning, an email header here, a bullet point there. Scotch tape stitched lines together into a crooked page. Risk register. Cultural protocols. A list of soft items somebody had mistaken for optional. The building's tone had infected the paper. "We expect, we propose, we assume." The Korean column flinched against it. She opened her laptop and searched. Daewon Plus. Chairman Park. Plus protocol. Articles bloomed, profiles, quotes, photos of ceremonial bows at waist height, carefully pitched. Honor is the hinge. Apologies must name the harm. Partnerships begin where dignity is observed. She read until the words became a dim chorus. On the bookshelf, a framed photo of her grandmother watched, with the half-smile of women who endure and teach. Knowledge unused is knowledge wasted. The photo reminded her, as it always did. Naomi cleared the table, made space for precision, and began to write, not a word-for-word correction. Faithfulness was not fidelity. She translated tone. She converted, "We expect your adjustment," into We would be honored by your consideration of an adjustment. She replaced the casual yo honorific with the formal mida, where partnership demanded parity. She moved apologies to the front of sentences where Korean places humility, so the door can open. She bent conditionals into counters that suggested mutual benefit instead of unilateral demand. She placed a single adverb sincerely in the only place it would sound like evidence and not varnish. She deleted an idiom that would calcify, replaced a verb that would bruise, and softened a closing that had been written like a stamp. Her pen paused. She thought about the protest chanting for the preservation of a language older than the city they blocked, the confusion, the police line, the cold metal of a van's interior after zip ties kiss skin. She thought about the grocery store she would clock into the next morning, and the way fluorescent light makes fruit look performative. She thought about the phone line that had carried soul into her ear and had gone dead like a door slammed because the host was rude. She kept writing. When she finished, dawn had fingered the blinds. The building across the street switched from studious dark to cheap gold. Birds tried on songs. Her eyes burned. Her hands were steady. She read the document aloud in Korean, mouth, rounding the vowels her grandmother had taught her, then again in English, tasting for tin. It held. She folded the pages down the spine with the same care you'd fold a letter to a child. She slid them into a manila envelope and wrote no name on the front. Tomorrow would require a decision. Hand it over and risk everything job. Apartment. The precarious anonymity that kept her safe. Say nothing and watch a bridge she could repair collapse with strangers on it. She washed her hands. The water ran brown with coffee grounds and a little tape glue. She turned off the tap and caught her face in the kitchen window's ghost. The woman in the glass looked tired. Yes, but the angle of her jaw suggested something other than defeat. The city blinked toward day. The refrigerator clicked. The building far away finished a long exhale and started another. Let's see if anybody's listening, Naomi said to the room. She tucked the envelope into her bag, placed her grandmother's photo face up on the table, and slept for 2 hours, with her shoes by the door like a runner who plans to beat the sunrise. Whitmore's elevators wore the night like a pressed suit. No wrinkles, no apologies. Naomi slid into one at 10:47 p.m. with her cart, her badge, and the manila envelope pressed flat against her ribs under her blue uniform. The stainless steel walls gave her back 3 versions of herself, one with jaw set, one with eyes tired, one with breath held. Floor numbers climbed in white. 60, 61. The cables whispered like someone shushing a secret. When the doors parted, the 65th floor had swapped its museum hush for war room murmur. Light bled from conference rooms in long rectangles. Screens flickered with bar graphs and satellite clocks. A corridor of glass offices glowed like terrariums for anxious men. Footsteps moved fast and quiet over carpet that made no sound, as if the building disapproved of panic being audible. Naomi's route lived in her muscles, the spiral from reception to research, to the corner where the air smelled faintly colder. She pushed the cart past the boardroom door shut, blinds only half closed. Inside, silhouettes. One of them had the stance of a man who believed the room belonged to him. Graham Whitmore gestured with a palm like a stamp. Beside him, a shorter shape with a tablet nodded, numbers hanging off his shoulders like weaponry. Naomi didn't pause it. People in uniforms only pause when asked. She started with the far offices, the ones that collected the day's crumbs, paper clips, broken staples, motivational quotes smudged with fingerprints. The building hummed in her bones. Somewhere, A printer coughed, a woman's voice low, precise, threaded down the hall, then cut off with the clean click of a door closing. At 11:13 p.m., she reached Trevor Phillips' office. The senior translator's glass door was ajar. His desk, a controlled disaster of binders and printouts, red marks snaking across margins like a surgeon's rehearsal, a jacket with elbow patches slumped on the back of his chair. His nameplate, Trevor Phillips, Global Communications, sat perfectly straight. The monitor's screensaver produced galaxies that folded into themselves, blooming and collapsing. Naomi looked down the corridor. Empty. She cleared her throat softly, as if warning the air. Then she stepped inside, laid a fresh liner in his trash can with a crisp twist, and set the manila envelope atop the stack of Daywin documents. No naughty, no signature, just the clean weight of paper. Her heart metronomed behind her sternum. She had imagined this moment duller, like dropping a letter into a mailbox. Instead, it felt like sliding a blade back into its sheath and hoping you hadn't cut yourself. She didn't allow herself to read the titles on the other folders: Japan, Brazil, Poland, worlds condensed into binders with spines like backbones. The fluorescent light in the ceiling buzzed once and steadied. Naomi backed away, leaving the envelope exactly askew, deliberate but not theatrical. At the doorway, she hesitated. The impulse to smooth the top edge, to make it impeccable, tugged at the corner of her fingers. She denied it. Too immaculate would look like an apology. In the hallway again, she became motion, dusting, wiping, emptying, replacing. When you work at the edges, you learn to be both present and absent. Her body wiped fingerprints off a glass wall that reflected a grid of city lights. Her mind replayed the Korean phrases she had woven hours earlier, their vowels still warm in her mouth. We would be honored. We recognize. We regret. In her pocket, the scrap of paper she'd written after the soul call crackled with each bend of her hip. Thursday. Respect. Direct. A door slammed hard enough to make the art frames tremble. A man in a charcoal suit came out of the boardroom with volatility wearing his face. He had the sleek impatience of a person who mistook speed for intelligence. Naomi had seen him before. In a magazine spread: Derek Vaughan, the company's communications chief, or some title with teeth. He clocked the cleaning cart, dismissed it, and stabbed at his phone with two aggressive fingers. No, the optics are catastrophic, he said into the device as if he hoped it would bruise. If Park pulls out, we're not talking a blip, we're talking obituary. He stalked past Trevor's office without seeing the envelope on the desk inside. Naomi pivoted into the copy room and pulled the trash bag free with practiced economy. The bag's breath puffed warm coffee and paper into her face. She tied it off and felt ridiculous for the way her hands shook. At 11, Susher, Trevor returned. Naomi watched through the glass from the corner of the corridor while pretending to fight a stubborn scuff on the baseboard. He entered mid-sip, coffee in one hand, an overfull file under the other. Mind elsewhere. He saw the envelope, frowned the way academic men frown at a comma out of place. He set his coffee down, peeled the flap, slid the translation free, and Reed, standing up a posture, modestly hostile to being convinced, his eyes tracked the page, then accelerated, then slowed. He set the first sheet aside carefully, then the second, then the third, and went back to the first again. Naomi angled her body so the vacuum's column hid her face. Trevor's brow released by increments, the way a fist unclenches when it remembers itself to be a hand. He turned toward the door, his gaze sweeping the hallway with a vague expectation of a junior consultant materializing on cue. His eyes passed over Naomi as if she were part of the trim. He stepped into the corridor and called to no one in particular. Did someone "Hey, did you put this on my desk?" An executive assistant speeding by shook her head mid-stride without breaking cadence. Trevor went back inside, sat, and pulled a pen from behind his ear like a magician palming a coin. He underlined 3 phrases she remembered weighing like little stones in her mouth. He circled one apology and wrote a single note, "Lead with this." Naomi let air leave her lungs slowly, as if it might betray her. She finished the baseboard, even though it had never been dirty. By midnight, the boardroom door opened. The same sharp slice of light, the same silhouettes. Voices traveled. Graham's strained baritone. The CFO's numbers. The precise woman again, quieter now. Derek's voice like a rolled newspaper, thwacking a table. Naomi kept the vacuum's hum just high enough to be plausible, just low enough to let language thread underneath. Specific translation errors that read as condescension. The CFO was saying, "That's a misread." Derek barked. "They're looking for leverage. Leverage and dignity aren't mutually exclusive." The precise woman said, "We called their vice president by a title used for subordinates." "Trevor," Graham asked. A pause. "I've seen a revision," Trevor answered from inside the room, not naming where it had fallen from. The tiny betrayals of voice surprise, relief, caution were a language too. It addresses tone, order, honorifics. It might repair some of the damage. "Might," Derek said. "Acid on the M. It's our best shot." Graham cut in. Naomi tidied the lounge again to have a reason to stay near the gravity of the room. The coffee maker burbled like a content animal now that it had fresh grounds. Her reflection in the stainless steel carafe looked like a person seen from the corner of the eye. At 12:27 a.m., the international line rang again. 1 blink. 2. 3. The red eye pulsed. Naomi looked down the hall, no one emerging. Everyone in conference. She hesitated the politest fraction of a second for fate to intervene. Fate had other calls. She picked up Whitmore Industries. "Good evening." Korean flowed through the line, calmer this time, but firm. The words sat upright. "Confirmation. Thursday. Direct apology." Naomi listened, heart hitching, then answered carefully in their language, placing each syllable like a dish on a table you didn't own. "We acknowledge the mistake. A correction is being prepared. A direct apology is intended." Silence. The caller inhaled. A small sea withdrew from a small shore. "We will expect sincerity," the voice said, and the line clicked dead. Naomi wrote the new nuance on the same paper in her pocket, graphite whispering across fibers, like a tiresome friend confiding again. She set the receiver down and felt the building turn slightly, the way a ship adjusts to a new current. She continued her route to keep from watching the boardroom door, as if she could. Will it open? She cleaned the immaculate sink in a restroom no one had used. She straightened a framed photo of the company's founder, shaking hands with some politician 20 years and 2 scandals ago. She untangled the vacuum cord from the wheel with a practiced tug that made the machine shiver and fall in line. A motion sensor light flickered at the end of the hall, then stayed on. Footsteps approached. Graham appeared first, T-locent, the sheen of fatigue on his face, making him look more like a man and less like a press release. Behind him, the precise woman, the CFO, and a handful of others. Trevor trailed, holding the revised pages. "The way you hold a thin animal you want not to startle." "We move at 9, Graham said, voice pitched for authority and the corridor both. "Trevor, I want the apology drafted at the top. We acknowledge, we correct, we recommit. We let them teach us where our blind spots are." "Already begun," Trevor said. "What about Park?" someone asked. "Park will take the call if we stop insulting him by accident." The precise woman answered. Derek came last, eyes hot, mouth tight. As he passed Naomi, his gaze landed on her for the first time all night. Not in recognition, only in the way a man takes inventory of objects in his environment, for potential utility or threat. Whatever calculation he performed, he filed her as neither. It skimmed her like a stone skips water and sinks elsewhere. They disappeared into their respective glass boxes. The corridor returned to its hum. Naomi emptied a bin and replaced the liner, a ritual that allowed her to stand still in motion. She felt a tremor, fear's thin cousin or its shy sibling, hope. On the elevator ride down at 1:19 a.m., she stood beside her cart and looked at her hands. They bore the scent of lemon cleaner, the faint tack of tape glue, the pencil's ghost. She felt, absurdly, that the building had looked back at her, not seen her exactly, but blinked. She caught the 1:32 bus, with the other ghosts, night shift nurses in scrubs, printed with cartoon planets, a line cook whose shoes had laid down all their rubber for other men's appetites, a security guard nodding into the shallowest sleep. The bus lights painted everyone in aquarium blue. Outside, the city's insomnia wove traffic into necklaces and looped them around towers that had names and egos. Naomi sat near the back, the manila envelope replaced by its absence against her ribs. She thumbed the folded scrap of notes in her pocket until the fibers grew soft. Thursday. Direct. Sincerity. The words stopped being instructions and became a drum. She dozed for 2 stops, woke when the bus hissed like the building's HVAC, and stepped into air that smelled like wet stone and fried onions from the cart that never closed. At home, the basil on the sill leaned toward a streetlight, the way it used to lean toward the sun. Her phone buzzed on the counter, 2 voicemails from the grocery store manager she'd forgotten to call back. One message from her landlord, mispronouncing her last name, to remind her the water will be shut off for routine maintenance between 10 and 2. She stood in the kitchen and let the noises layer. Refrigerator. Click. Distance sirène. Neighbor's TV murmuring reruns. A dog downstairs, shaking its collar once like punctuation. Sleep came like an unconvincing alibi. It let her go at 7. By noon, the headlines had found their way to every app that pretended not to be hungry for disaster. Markets were a color that meant bad. Analysts questioned Whitmore's Asian strategy. One banner announced like a sermon. Another said, more gleeful, bored in emergency talks. Somewhere, men in blazers typed the word headwinds as if they were meteorologists. Naomi read none of it. She worked her second job and smiled at strangers and rang up fruit that wanted better lighting. When the clock finally let her go, the city had slipped again into its evening shimmer. Naomi found a payphone because some things taste right only from a chipped mug, not a tumbler. She fed it coins. The metal swallowed her change like a gull, unbothered and efficient. She dialed the number she had memorized from the small desk by the executive lounge window. Whitmore Industries. The assistant answered, professional warmth lacquered in place. This is Angela Wright, Naomi said, lowering her register half a step, straightening her spine as if the phone could see it. Confidence has a sound in any language. Independent consultant. I have notes for Mr. Whitmore regarding the Daywin corrections. A pause, the kind that weighs names. Mr. Whitmore is in meetings, but he's requested all relevant information immediately. Your notes. Naomi closed her eyes, saw the pages in Trevor's hands, saw the word order like a stairwell. She spoke slowly. A scalpel, not a sword. Lead with the apology. Paragraph 3. Adjust the honorific to signal parity, not supervision. Paragraph 7. Replace the casual closing with formal conditional. Section 4. Emphasize mutual benefit. and he should address Chairman Park personally, by name. Understood, the assistant said, pen sounds zipping through the line. And your firm, Ms. Right. Independent, Naomi repeated, and hung up before her courage asked for a receipt. She stood with the phone's dial tone in her ear, until it became the building's hum again, the same frequency, following her home through streets where buses sighed, pigeons bargained, and a boy practiced a skateboard trick that required failing until muscle remembered what wanting feels like. On her stoop, she looked up at the city and thought, not for the first time, that the towers didn't watch anyone. But sometimes, if you pressed an ear to their throats, you could hear whether they were honest about breathing. Tomorrow would be Thursday. The words sat on her tongue and tasted ceremonial. The basil leaned toward the dark. She turned out the light. The envelope was gone, but its weight remained. A phantom she carried the way. You carry a bruise you don't show anyone, not because you're ashamed, but because you're saving the story for when it matters. By 8 in the evening, the 65th floor wore its nerves openly. A pyramid of bottled water had been constructed in the lounge, as if hydration could make a culture less brittle. The air was colder than usual corporate air conditioning as crisis theater security badges beeped more often. Shoes softened their sound. Someone had swapped the usual playlist of tasteful jazz for silence. It made the fluorescent lights feel louder. Naomi arrived with a revised route in her hand and instructions underlined twice. Executive floor. By 9 p.m. invisible. No vacuum during meeting. She signed the sheet with her last name neat and small. The cart's wheel, lately fond of squeaking, behaved tonight as if bribed. Through the aquarium pane of the main conference room, she saw the table lengthened to its maximum arrogance and dressed in white porcelain and stainless carafes. At the head stood Graham Whitmore, jacket still on, hair obeying. Beside him, the precise woman from the other night. Naomi would learn later her name was Margaret Sue. Organized printouts with a surgeon's calm. Trevor hovered at the far end, like a man who knows a small thing can carry a large weight if placed correctly. Then the visitors arrived. 5 black suits with lapels that knew tailoring, faces arranged in diplomatic serenity, the choreography of bows precise and unhurried. The tallest of them, a man whose smile did not traffic in teeth, could only be Chairman Park. At his right, a younger executive with watchful eyes and a pen Naomi recognized as expensive because it did not want to be noticed. Kang, head of international relations. The doors sealed, and the glass remembered how to keep secrets. Naomi dusted the hallway frames. In the glass, the room's reflection made a film she could watch without appearing to. A server delivered tea. A translator, Trevor, stood to Graham's left, throat clearing, shoulders squared. Naomi watched mouths move and hands travel. She watched listening happen. The rarest corporate skill, sound reached her as a softened thread through a door imperfectly closed. Our regrets for the miscommunications, Graham said, words far more careful than the version of him she'd heard before. We recognize the harm of our tone. Trevor's Korean was smooth enough to skate on, but smooth is not always safe. Naomi's ear pricked. He'd chosen an honorific Naomi would use for a valued junior, not an equal counterpart. The sentence turned with the wrong weight. Chairman Park's eyes cooled by 2 degrees. Kang spoke first measured, courteous, withholding. Trevor rendered it into English, and Naomi felt the door of meaning drift a few inches off its hinges. She kept moving dust, straighten, align until her route brought her close to the threshold. The conference room door was cracked just enough for air, just enough for a mistake to slip out and wave. Graham resumed. We value the potential of this partnership, he said, and Trevor translated the honorific again, a shade low. The grammar, a hair casual. Naomi's throat tightened. Her grandmother's voice, mind your endings, child. They seat the whole table, tapped her shoulder. She hadn't planned to speak. The word left her mouth anyway, soft as a note to herself. Jundong Hamnida. Not Jandong Hamnida. It was barely sound. Still, the room heard it. The 5 suits turned their heads in eerie unison. Graham stopped mid-gesture. Trevor froze, eyes flicking left, searching for the ghost who had corrected him. Kang stood slightly, peering through the gap. His Korean, when it came, was quicksilver. "Who is that woman?" he asked the table, but his gaze found Naomi in the hall with a dusting cloth, caught like a white flag in her hand. "She is correct about the honorific." A beat stretched. It could have been an hour. Naomi felt heat rise along her neck, the terrible sensation of skin learning what light is. Fight, flight, or something older become wall ward and failed. She bowed at the threshold from the waist, the way her grandmother had shown her in a kitchen that smelled of anchovy broth and rain. "I apologize for the interruption," she said in Korean now, careful and plain, her vowels respecting the room. "My grandmother was from Busan. I speak imperfectly. If shock makes a sound, it is the soft intake of 10 people at once." Graham blinked as if lights had changed themselves. Margaret's eyes sharpened, not hostile, curious. Trevor looked briefly relieved and then, almost immediately, defensive. Derek wasn't in the room. The absence announced him. Chairman Park's mouth softened. He replied in English, accent precise, humor peaking. "Your staff speaks our language with respect. This is promising." She correctly identified an error, Kang added, switching to English as well. He regarded Naomi as one measures a bridge they might cross by night. An important one. Graham finally located his voice. "You're on the cleaning staff," he said. "Not a question." "Yes, sir," Naomi answered. English now. Dusting cloth lowered, pulse audible in her ears. "Night shift. And you speak Korean," he said, because sometimes the mind grabs the smallest fact when the largest one scares it. "My grandmother taught me," Naomi said. "I studied linguistics." Margaret's eyebrows rose a millimeter in what, from her, was the equivalent of applause. Trevor shifted his weight, his eyes speaking a guilt he might deny later. "Not a bad correction. Still my room." Park raised his hand gently, retaking command. "Let us continue," he said. With attention to endings, Naomi bowed again, smaller this time. "A thank you. A retreat." She backed away, hands steady by visible effort. The door clicked. The conference resumed, recalibrated by a whisper. In the corridor, the building's hum returned, but it was a different chord now. A minor note introduced. Naomi walked to the supply closet, shut herself inside the smell of lemon and plastic, and let the tremor pass through her arm. Her chest ached like she'd held a note too long. She counted to 15 in Korean, then in English, then in numbers that didn't belong to any language, only to breath. When she emerged, a security guard stood at the far end. Radio clipped. "Posture apologetics." "Miss Carter," he called, voice almost kind. "Mr. Whitmore will see you when the meeting concludes." "Understood," Naomi said. The words tasted like copper. For the next hour, she worked in a mechanical grace, folding paper towels into triangles, aligning pens along a credenza that would survive any apocalypse, with perfect symmetry through the glass. The meeting's energy changed. Trevor's shoulders had relaxed by degrees. Graham was speaking less and listening more, surprising, like watching a statue drink water. Park spoke with his hands open, palms showing. Kang rarely took notes and remembered everything anyway. Margaret interjected politely. and then only when necessary. Each sentence placed as if price-tagged. At 10, Shawu. The door opened. The delegation exited with the intention of men leaving a room knowing they will return. Park clasped Graham's hand in both of his, a gesture that meant something if you had read the manual. They took the elevator, their reflections, leaving like fish disappearing into deeper glass. The corridor slid back into fluorescent normal. Graham turned to Trevor. "Find out everything about Naomi Carter," he said, low. It wasn't cruel. It was administrative. 5 minutes later, the security guard reappeared. "He'll see you now." Naomi left her cart in the hall like a shed skin and stepped into the CEO's office. It was an argument for height. The city stood on tiptoes to look in. Graham sat behind a desk that could have been a small stage. Tableli. Lines of worry, drawn in soft pencil across his forehead. "Sit," he said without looking up. When he did look up, he looked properly, as if the light in the room had been adjusted for clarity. "You've been here 14 months, he began. "Night cleaning staff." "Yes, Seer. Pacific West University," he continued, glancing at the tablet. "Masters in Comparative Linguistics with a focus on East Asia." "Yes. And an arrest," he added. "Not unkind. Not kind. Disorderly conduct. Language rights protest." "The charge was reduced," Naomi said. "The practiced line. I was demonstrating for indigenous language funding." There was confusion. He leaned back in his chair, something in his face toggling between calculation and what could pass for conscience. "You placed a revised translation on Trevor Phillips' desk." She let the lie die, then chose the truth. "Yes. And earlier today he lifted the tablet as if it weighed you. Called my office, identifying yourself as Angela Wright, independent consultant, with instructions for our apology." Yes. His jaw worked, either chewing or choosing. "Why?" "Because the mistakes were going to cost you the deal," she said, and the "you" surprised her by sounding plural. "Because I could help. You took it upon yourself to interfere in a billion-dollar negotiation," he said. "I took it upon myself to fix an avoidable insult," she countered. No rancor in the tone, only a seam of steel, a silence. He stood, walked to the window, let the city write itself across his suit in nocturnal hieroglyphics. "Your corrections likely saved us," he said finally, "which is inconvenient to my sense of order." He turned. "The board wants the mysterious consultant found so they can buy absolution by contract. I could offer you a position." His face made a shape that tried to be generous and didn't quite get there. "Cultural something. Intelligence." She thought of the basement office she had not yet been assigned. The way organizations reward the people who break rules that save them by giving them new rules to drown them. "Is it real work or something for a press release?" she asked. "Because if you ask the question quickly, sometimes you can outrun the consequences." His eyes narrowed, not offended, alert. "Does it matter?" "It's a ladder either way." "It matters," Naomi said, "standing the way you do. When sitting feels like apology. I don't want to be a prop to impress the men who decide whether other men have dignity. I want actual work, responsibility, respect." The word hovered between them, ridiculous and necessary. Graham studied hair. "Then, you're suspended from your cleaning duties with pay while HR sorts the background." He slid a card across the desk like a concession. His direct line, "Use this." "Am I fired?" "No," he said. "You're being evaluated." She took the card. The weight was wrong for its importance, too light. "One more thing," he said as she reached for the door. "How did you know about the honorific tonight?" "You weren't in the prep." She met his eyes. "I listen," she said. No one notices the cleaning lady. She left him to the city and the tablet, and the part of himself that had started suspecting the world was larger than the room. In the hallway, her cart waited with the quiet loyalty of tools. She pushed it toward the elevator, heart too loud for a building that preferred humming. She didn't see the camera from the far end of the corridor, the one attached to a hand, the hand attached to a man in an unremarkable suit. The lens drank her in uniform, dusting cloth. The small bow of her head, as the elevator opened, a shutter sound too soft for the human ear, took what it wanted and promised trouble. Downstairs, the lobby reflected itself in marble until nothing looked certain. Frank waved from his station, concern creasing his brow. But she couldn't stop without turning questions into answers. Outside, the air was the temperature of a held breath. Sirens threaded distance into the night. On the bus, she put Graham's card in her pocket with the folded notes from Seoul, and felt them nudge each other like neighbors deciding whether to speak. Her phone buzzed once with a message from an unknown number. Nice correction. Who are you? She stared at it until the screen dimmed. The basil plant on her windowsill would be leaning toward the streetlight again, mistaking it for dawn. She closed her eyes. She could still see the room, the small correction floating across the table like a bird that had flown in through a vent. No one thought to check. For once, they had looked at her because of what she said, not in spite of it. When she opened her eyes, the city was still there, practicing power. The bus exhaled, somewhere far above. A building considered whether it wanted to learn to listen. The knock came too hard for morning. Naomi's first thought was the landlord. Her second was the past, come back to collect interest. She pulled on a sweater and opened the door to find a woman she barely knew, holding a phone like a flare. "Don't freak out," the woman said, already stepping inside. "Okay, maybe freak out a little." It took Naomi a second to place her. The junior associate from marketing with the open face and the habit of meeting eyes. Sadie. Right. Sadie Morrow. Sadie's smile was bright and weaponized. "Vomit near your vacuum. You need to see this." On the screen, a headline that sounded like a dare cleaning lady saves Whitmore's $1 billion deal. Underneath, a grainy shot of Naomi exiting Whitmore's lobby, shoulders hunched, tota strap biting into her collarbone. The caption made her uniform into a verdict. Naomi's stomach dropped the way elevators do when you don't trust them. Where did they? Somebody with a camera and a grudge. Saadi said, "It's everywhere. Finance blogs, gossip sites with better fonts than morals." She flashed another link. Hashtag invisible no more trending. I hate that I love the hashtag. Naomi sank onto the arm of the couch. The room smelled like lemon from last night's cleaning, basil from the windowsill, and trouble. How did you find my address?" "I'm good at research," Saadi said, which in marketing meant, "My hobby is knowing things before it's wise." She softened. "I figured you shouldn't read this alone." The article was a narrative with the messy confidence of certainty, an unnamed source inside Whitmore, a mysterious consultant, a midnight correction that turned a collapsing deal, a janitor. It kept using that word who spoke a language the executives didn't bother to respect. The comments performed their usual theater of belief and bile. Naomi read until the words blurred, then put the phone down like it might bite. "This is bad." "It's something," Sadie countered, leaning against the kitchen counter. "The company looks like it can't recognize talent unless it's hand-delivered on a resume that smells like private school. Meanwhile, you look like an accident that embarrassed powerful people. A woman who did the right thing when it mattered." Sadie's voice gentled. Also that the basil on the sill angled toward the window as if it understood publicity. Naomi rubbed a thumb along one leaf. I got suspended, she said, surprising herself by telling it, with pay, while they evaluate me. Sadie's eyebrows climbed. So you're on the payroll and not allowed to scrub their sins for a few nights. Sounds like leverage. Naomi's phone vibrated on the table, a number she recognized from the store that paid less but demanded smiles. She answered, already bracing. Hi. Jeff. Naomi. Hey. The manager's voice had corporate caution pasted over it. Listen, big picture. We love initiative. But corporate's jittery about the media attention, it's a distraction for shoppers. We're going to have to, make a change. Fire me. Transition your rollout. A soft sigh. I'm sorry. She stared at the basil. Thanks for letting me know. She hung up and let her head tip forward, just enough to feel gravity touch her scalp. Sadie didn't fill the silence with advice. After a beat, she slid a paper cup across the table coffee. Black. Hot enough to anchor. Okay, Sadie said, a strategist now. If the spotlight is here whether you want it or not, we choose where you stand in it. I don't want the spotlight. Doesn't matter. You get to decide whether it cooks you or keeps you warm. Naomi let out a sound that could have been a laugh if it hadn't been tired. Do you talk like this in meetings? I edit the metaphors out. She opened her phone again. My friend Julia runs a podcast, Invisible Women, stories about competence in the wrong clothes. She's been texting me since 6 a.m. She wants your voice. Not the articles. Podcasts are forever. Naomi said, so are mistakes. Exactly. Sadie said, make your mistake on purpose. Julia's studio was a living room with good microphones and plants that had survived more than one winter. Naomi sat where she was told and watched the red light come on, like a small sunrise. Julia, all freckled calm, made space with her voice. Tell me about the first word you remember loving. Julia said, Halmione. Naomi said without thinking, grandmother. It felt like a lap. They started there, not with scandal. Naomi moved carefully at first, like crossing a creek on stones that might wobble. Pacific West. Linguistics. The protest that turned a crowd into a charge, and a charge into a record that followed her like a shadow with opinions. The night shift. The building's hum. The first correction whispered to no one. You didn't do this to be seen. Julia said, no. Naomi's throat tightened. I did it because if someone insults you in a language they didn't bother to learn, you have to hand them the right words. And now the world knows your name. Naomi considered the red light and all the ears it represented. Names are how we find each other, she said, but they're also how they find you. When the interview ended, Julia took off her headphones and said quietly, whatever happens next, you told it your way. On the sidewalk, the city's vowels were traffic and steam, and the complaint of bus brakes. Sadie bumped Naomi's shoulder with hers. You were good. Terrified. Naomi said, same thing. If you're doing it right, by afternoon. The episode had multiplied itself across feeds. Naomi didn't have accounts on her email never busy choke. One message subject line said, we see you. Another said, you are unprofessional and deserve to be sued. A third, from a domain that wore its prestige like a perfume, read, opportunity. LG International wanted a conversation. Two other firms whose names sounded like weather systems made noises that sounded like money. Naomi sat at her small kitchen table and stared at the pile of maybes until the wood grain blurred into maps. The phone rang again with a number she had seen on a business card slid across a desk, like a dare. Ms. Carter, Graham said when she answered. His voice carried fatigue and a recent scolding. I've just come from a board meeting where I learned new definitions of the word accountability. 1. Did you pass the spelling test? Barely. He exhaled. They're right. I mishandled this. Naomi said nothing. It was a luxury she had rarely possessed. Chairman Park has also made it clear, Graham continued, that Daewin expects you in the room for all future discussions. Without you, they may reconsider. So, Naomi said, more tired than triumphant, you're calling to offer you a position. The words felt reluctant in his mouth and truer for it. Cultural intelligence specialist. Reporting to me. Competitive salary. We can navigate HR together. What would I do in that role? She asked, not letting gratitude drive. You would keep us from repeating our mistakes. Translation and apology on loop. She said, I want more than that. A pause. What do you want? A real department, she said, surprising herself with the ease of the sentence. Not just Korean. Everywhere we pretend English is a passport. I want authority to change process, not just prose. That's ambitious for someone who was cleaning toilets last week, Graham said, then sounded like he heard himself. That wasn't, it was, Naomi said, and that's the point. Across the line, a hum, HVAC, nerves. The way glass towers breathe when you're up too high to know it. The board authorized me to do what it takes to keep Daewin. If what it takes is you with a team, we'll find the money. And the respect, she asked. That part I can't legislate, he said quietly, but I can make space. She could hear the cost in his voice. It made her feel sorry for him and furious at the same time. Put it in writing. I will. He hesitated. One more thing. Stay off Twitter. I don't have Twitter. Good. Keep not having it. They hung up, and for a full minute, Naomi let herself lean both palms on the table and breathe like a person between cliffs. The basil grazed the window, wanting the faint heat of the glass. She watered it with a recycled yogurt cup because not everything needed to be complicated. Her doorbell rang again. This time the man on the other side wore a suit, the color of consideration, and a smile that had seen attorneys. Ms. Carter, he said, hand extended, as if the world were a handshake. William Taylor, Meridian Consulting. He didn't wait for an invitation to step into her living room. You've become instructive. I'm not taking visitors, Naomi said, but he was already sitting. We represent several firms interested in talent underappreciated by their current owners, he said smoothly. We'd like to offer you a role with autonomy and compensation that makes Whitmore's proposal look like a tip jar. She stayed standing. Why? Because you're useful, he said, as if honesty were a gift. And because discrediting Whitmore by hiring the woman they threw in the basement is a bonus. I haven't been thrown anywhere yet, Naomi said. Yet, he echoed, smiling like a chess player with an extra queen. He slid a card across her coffee table. It made a small sound like a door thinking about closing. Think on it. When the door clicked behind him, the apartment felt smaller, as if money had briefly taken up too much oxygen. Naomi lifted the card, looked at the embossed letters, and set it next to Graham's. Two promises facing each other like strangers at a crosswalk. One of them would jaywalk. Her phone buzzed Sadie. A link. A line. Turn on business now. He's squirming. On the television, lights too white made Graham's face an honest map of fatigue. The interviewer smiled with incisors. How did Whitmore miss the talent cleaning your floors? Graham inhaled and did something Naomi didn't expect. He told a version of the truth. We became too hierarchical. We forgot that capability doesn't come in a single package. He glanced at the camera like a man learning to look people in the eye. Ms. Carter will help us correct that. Naomi clicked the TV off before the next question could edit her feelings. On the counter, two business cards waited. On the windowsill, the basil leaned into the night. Her phone rang again. An international number, the vowels of soul. She answered, Ms. Carter. said a voice with warmth carefully measured. "This is Jun-hyun from Daewon. I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," she said, letting the Korean carry the conversation forward. The language gave her a spine, where English would have offered only politeness. "We wanted to thank you," he said, "for insisting on dignity in our exchange, and to let you know we will request your presence in all ongoing talks. Trust has to sit in a chair, not just hover." When the call ended, she stood a long time at the window with the phone cool in her hand. The city below moved goods and gossip and hunger. Above, planes stitched slow lines through a sky that remembered stars, even if it couldn't see them. She knew the story would not end with an offer. Stories rarely end. They shift tense. But for the first time in months, the next page didn't look like someone else had already written it. She took a pen and, on the back of the Meridian card, wrote 3 words in a hand small enough to hide and clear enough to read. "No more invisible." Then she taped it inside the kitchen cabinet, where she kept the plain white mugs, so she'd see it every morning, and the words would have to earn their keep. Outside, Asian moved away. Inside, a plant reached for imitation daylight somewhere uptown. Men were writing her into memos and exit strategies. Somewhere downtown, a podcast episode kept multiplying in strangers' headphones. The red light now. 1,000 tiny suns. Naomi rinsed a cup, set it on the rack, and let the water run an extra second just to hear it. The apartment's quiet, gathered like a crowd waiting for a door to open. She didn't promise it anything. She didn't apologize to it either. The phone stayed on the table. The cards stayed side by side. The basil stayed green. The night, for once, did not hum like a building. It sounded like breath. The badge clicked green for the first time, with her name printed not as a ghost but as a line item. Naomi Carter, Director, Cultural Intelligence. The lift delivered her past. The floors that smelled like cologne and glass cleaner, past the floors with art that was mostly expense reports, pretending to be paintings, down to B1 records. Storage, the building's unphotogenic memory. The hallway was cool and smelled faintly of cardboard and toner. An HR rep with the smile of someone paid to lay out disappointments led the way. "We moved quickly," she said, pushing open a door with the shine of fresh paint. "Quiet down here. Less distraction. You'll appreciate it." The office was a reformed storage closet that hadn't fully confessed. Metal pipes ribbed the ceiling like a held breath. The desk was a patchwork of 2 older desks, negotiating a truce. One computer tower hummed like a patient on a ventilator. There was a chair that had planned to retire. Naomi stood in the doorway and let her face be polite. "It'll do. We've approved 2 headcount to start," the HR rep added, a little too brightly. "Final sign-off at the executive level for titles and banding." "Of course," Naomi said. Translation: "You can hire the people who make you look good, as long as they don't cost what respect usually does." When the door shut, the quiet came back and sat beside her. She eased a hand along the desk's edge. Somewhere above her head, a printer coughed and a dolly clattered. Somewhere far above, a boardroom window discovered it could double as a mirror. She set her bag down, taped a small square of yellow inside the top drawer. "No more invisible," and booted the computer. The startup chime sounded like an apology. By noon, she had a list. Internal employees who spoke something besides English and ambition. HR had already sent a roster of approved candidates, polished names with MBAs that glistened like showroom sedans. She pushed that list to the corner of her screen and built her own. The mailroom clerk who once signed for a package from Sao Paulo and answered in Portuguese before the courier could be surprised. The executive assistant, who tracked 4 time zones without complaining and could say thank you in 7 languages with the exact right bow of the head to match each. The cafe barista, who corrected a banker's pronunciation of a Syrian town once, and then never did it again because the banker's face had answers she didn't like. At 12 o'clock, she was walking. The elevator made her feel like an intruder. The stairs made her feel like she'd chosen it. She found him in the mailroom wearing a T-shirt with a faded flamenco crest and the kind of grin that kept offices humane. "Hugo?" she asked. He looked up from a crate of padded envelopes. "Depends who's asking," he said. Accent. A soft river between consonants. "Someone who needs a 4th language at the table," she said. His grin widened. "I have 5, if you count my grandmother's German that comes out when she scolds me. Consider yourself recruited." On 19, an executive assistant named Tamara was knitting the day back together with calendar invites when Naomi approached. Gray streaks like lightning framed a face that had given too many gentle warnings. No one heeded until they were expensive. "Tamara," Naomi said, "you're the one with the headlines." Tamara replied, eyes bright, "I like the podcast better. Fewer adjectives. I need somebody who knows the choreography around men who think the center of the room belongs to them." Naomi said. Tamara's laugh warmed the corridor. "Oh, honey, I have a doctorate in that." At the cafe window, a young woman with a natural halo of curls steamed milk like she was coaxing weather. Her name tag said Diana. Her eyes said she'd learned to make herself smaller than her competence. "Do you still volunteer with the refugee legal clinic?" Naomi asked when the line thinned. Diana blinked, surprised. "I did. Translation. Intake." "Why?" "Because you know how to listen when it matters." Naomi set a card on the counter. "I need that more than I need resume bullet points." Within a week, the basement command had 3 new chairs that didn't match and a corkboard crowded with maps. The room's air changed a low buzz of languages trying on each other's coats. Hugo printed a sticker, CIC, in block letters, and slapped it on the door. Then, beneath it, the translation in Portuguese, German, and a defiant Sharpie Korean from Naomi that made Hugo clap. Their first morning together, Naomi brought pastries no one could afford on principle. "There's no handbook," she said, "so we're going to write one by messing up and apologizing without excuses." "Sounds like management," Tamara said, then winked to sand the edge. They began with inventory, not product assumptions. What did Whitmore call global that was actually just us with nicer fonts? Where did emails default to friendliness that sounded like pressure? Which contracts imagined silence meant assent? They made columns. They made a shared doc that grew like ivy. On Thursday, the VP of Operations called with voice and panic. "Our German partner," he said, "won't return our calls. They've started routing everything through attorneys, which is never where you want a conversation to live. Send us everything." Naomi said, "All email threads, originals, not just what the last translator told you they meant." The file drop arrived like a storm. Hugo's eyebrows rose before he'd finished the 3rd page. "They've been yelling at us politely for months," he said. "We translated it into suggestion." Tamara leaned over his shoulder, lips pursed. "See here, we require becomes we recommend, and immediate remedy became we look forward to improvements. No wonder they think we're unserious." Naomi pulled a chair closer to the screen. "Schedule a call," she said. "No PPT, no spin. We tell them we heard the volume finally." The conference room upstairs was empty when they entered. Lights off, city pale in the windows. The call connected with a chime that sounded like a doorbell on a cold day. Two German executives appeared on screen, faces composed in that particular way you get when a partner has mistaken you for a suggestion. Naomi greeted them in German, not polished, but precise, and then, in English, because clarity sometimes requires stepping where everyone can stand. "We owe you an apology," she began, simple as a plate. "We read your urgency as advice. We were wrong." On the other end of the line, shoulders softened, the older executive Henning, according to his email, signature nodded. "It is good to hear the word apology." Hugo, in German, walked them through the specific phrases that had lost their edge in translation. Tamara kept the notes in 2 columns. What we heard, what they said. It looked like a confession and a plan. By the end of an hour, they had more than a ceasefire. They had a protocol, immediate upgrades to quality control, named timeline, a shared glossary both teams would use so that urgent couldn't be politely filed under later again. When the call ended, the VP of operations, who had hovered by the door as if afraid to breathe on their work, exhaled a single syllable. "How?" "We listened," Naomi said, packing her notes, "and then we put that listening into writing. Word, as it does when it likes what it's carrying, moved fast." A product team asked for a crash course on East African procurement etiquette. Finance wanted help turning a debt notice into a face-saving agreement with a Thai supplier. Legal sent a draft contract to preempt any more international embarrassments, which Naomi found both insulting and useful. Upstairs, the oxygen changed. People who usually traveled like bullet points started stopping by the basement command room with faces that were asking for something besides coffee. Margaret from the negotiation team came down in flats one afternoon, sat on the edge of a desk, and asked, what would a sincere apology look like to a partner from Osaka? She took notes longhand and said thank you like she meant it. Not everyone approved of the migration. In a boardroom with lights that erased pores, Derek Vaughan folded his hands and pursed his mouth at Graham. "The publicity wave has crested," he said. "Time to return to strategies that don't depend on a Cinderella narrative." The German deal was on life support, Graham replied, jaw tight. "They stabilized it. With apologies," Derek said smoothly. "That's customer service, not strategy. Sometimes the difference is grammar," Graham said. Derek's smile was the temperature of ice water. "Copy that to communications. Meanwhile, she's hiring a mailroom clerk and a barista. Is this Whitmore or a language arts camp? People with the right skills?" Graham said, though some part of his voice asked permission from the room. "The board is concerned," Derek said, making board sound like a parent you didn't want to disappoint. "Standards exist for a reason. If every talented barista could be a director, we'd be out of chairs." Graham stared at the window like it might coach him. "We'll review scope next week." Back in the basement, scope was a joke, written on a post-it and stuck to the printer. In practice, it looked like long days and emails that smelled faintly of jet fuel. It looked like Diana holding a call with a North African vendor and adjusting her cadence until the man on the other end stopped interrupting. It looked like Tamara sending an internal memo that taught executives how to write a request without pressing dignity into the carpet. It looked like Hugo building a small wiki labeled "Things We Keep Getting Wrong," and the list already being too long for one screen. At 8:13 p.m. on a Tuesday, a message pinged Naomi's inbox from a name with no face. Sentinel. Subject: careful who reads your mail. Body: it doesn't like losing rooms. She stared at it until the cursor turned into a metronome for her pulse. She didn't forward it. She printed it, a crime that kept its secrets on paper, and slid it under the liner of her desk drawer with the yellow square that had gotten her this far. 2 days later, an internal email Naomi had sent only to her 3-person team, an analysis of Whitmore's chronic tone deafness, frank enough to make comfort flinch, surfaced in the inboxes of half the management chain. Stripped of context, the subject line changed to something that sounded like a dare. Our leadership problem. She saw the forwarded version when Tamara rushed in from the hallway with a printout like a fire report. Naomi read her own sentences. We default to command where collaboration would do. We perform deference and misread dignity as compliance, now weaponized by the change in audience and the addition of italics she hadn't written. Her phone lit with a summons. Whitmore. Office. Now. The ride up felt longer than the first time she'd spoken in a doorway. The air on the executive floor carried a different pressure, as if lawyers breathed it first. Margaret passed her with an unreadable look that tilted towards sorry. Graham was pacing, the forwarded email glowing on a screen too big to be forgiven. Would you care to explain this? He asked, not shouting. Worse. It was internal. Naomi said, a strategy note. It's been edited. You called leadership culturally arrogant and deliberately obtuse, he said, reading her words like origami unfolded into accusation. You suggested a reset of hierarchical thinking. Our partners have been telling us the same thing in kinder terms, she said. She kept her voice level, though something in her hands wanted to become earthquake. Hire me to be honest, or don't hire me. But don't hire me to be a mascot and then punish me for speaking in complete sentences. He flinched, whether at mascot or sentences. She couldn't tell. Do you understand how this looks? I put my credibility on the line for you. I put my name on your line for this company, she said. If the truth offends the decor, change the decor. The room held its breath. 2 floors of building, listening with the kind of interest that breaks things. He pressed fingers to the bridge of his nose, exhaled slowly, and gestured toward the door. Give me the night, he said. Go. She did. In the hallway, the carpet felt thick like a tongue swallowing. The elevator closed with a chime that sounded like a polite refusal. In the parking garage, Sadie leaned against a Honda that had seen better tires. Her face was all urgency. This wasn't an accident, she said before Naomi could speak. I traced the forward. It came from Communications Derek's org, and I kept pulling. Meridian Consulting shows up in his calendar more than his dentist. Meridian, Naomi repeated, picturing the card on her counter. Bridges and bait. They're shopping your story to competitors as proof Graham is desperate, Sadie said, and someone in Daywin is trying to warn you. She held up her phone. A screenshot of a Korean message with a subject Naomi recognized even before her brain translated sincere truth. Attached, a file icon with a name like a dare. Reset. NC. Naomi looked at the concrete ceiling, the pipes, the slow drip of whatever cities use to keep themselves going. Above her, offices turned off lights that would turn themselves back on without learning anything. Beside her, a friend waited with a rumor that wanted to be a plan. Okay, Naomi said, the word falling into a decision it had been practicing for years. If they want to play games with language, she looked at Sadie, at the phone, at the night that smelled like oil and rain. Let's make a trap that speaks 5. They started with paper, because paper doesn't forget. Hugo drafted 5 versions of a single update memo, each with a barely visible scar, a synonym that meant too much in Zulu legalese. A German modal, hedged 1 notch softer than it should be. A Korean honorific placed like a hairline crack. Naomi added a French turn of phrase that, to a Paris corporate ear, whispered urgency. and to anyone else read as style. Tamara copy-edited the English so clean a knife could see itself in it. 5 suspects. 5 fingerprints. Hugo said, pinning them to the corkboard with colored tack. Some Shalaton. Different blood type. Keep the differences small enough to pass a busy person's glance, Naomi said, but loud enough to sing in the right room. They named the documents the way thieves name doors. Coutroy's alignment draft, each with an invisible watermark keyed to a different eye. One version, the one labeled with a mint green dot, only they understood, included a highly specific rumor. Daewin considering adding semiconductors to the partnership, tempting enough to bait a leak, precise enough to trace. How do we get them to the right desks? Diana asked. Through the people who live between rooms, Naomi answered, texting Zadie. Minutes later, a thread pinged into life. Zadie, send me the 5 PDFs. I'll route via. Do you mind giving this a quick glance? Which is corporate for please feel important. Naomi, they are booby-trapped. Choose carefully. Zadie, oh, I always do. By noon, the packets were in motion, carried by assistants who knew where the bodies and the staplers were buried. Tamara watched calendar invites roll like tide. Hugo set a script to crawl internal traffic. Diana, who'd learned to read silence, waited. Naomi held the basil leaf between finger and thumb, not to pluck, only to feel the soft insistence of chlorophyll, still believing in light, no more invisible. Read the square hidden inside her drawer. It looked back like a contract. Her phone vibrated with a number that didn't care what time zone Courage lived in. Ms. Carter, said a voice rinsed in exhaustion. It's Whitmore's assistant. Mr. Wan, Whitmore requests your presence at Mercy Hospital. Family matter, he said. You'd understand. Hospitals smell like bleach. Trying to argue with sorrow. Naomi followed signs up 2 floors to a waiting room, where news muted itself on a television. No one watched. Graham sat with his tie loosened and his hands clasped in the posture of men taught not to pray in public. Thank you for coming, he said, standing and not knowing what to do with his height. My father, a beat, a stroke. They think not catastrophic. But his voice trailed into the squeak of rubber soles in hallways where destinies turned on machines with soft beeps. Naomi sat. I'm sorry. He nodded once, jaw set as if stoicism could be medical. For a long minute, the room was only HVAC and fear. Do you know why I built that building the way it is? He asked finally, eyes on some remembered blueprint, glass and line. Clean, sharp hierarchies. My father worked in a factory where the ceiling leaked on brilliance. He'd come home with ideas and grease, and no one would take the ideas because they could see the grease. I thought, I'll make a place where merit is obvious. And along the way, Naomi said, keeping gentleness in her tone and iron in the words, you made the ceiling out of glass that reflects your own face. His mouth pulled, not quite a smile. The irony is eloquent. Silence. Then motion. He turned toward her with a kind of surrender. I think there is rot in my company that is not philosophical. I think someone is cutting holes in the boat. I don't know how to prove it. She told him about the email that wasn't an email reset, int and the anonymous warning, and the trap with 5 voices. She watched him process, saw the part of his brain that monetized everything. Try to keep up with the part only recently learning to listen. You're building a linguistic tripwire, he said. We're building accountability that sings on contact. She corrected. His phone buzzed. He read, winced. The board wants status on Daewin hourly now. I'm not sure they would approve of me handing you the keys to the building. Then don't tell them yet, she said, standing. But if you want rot exposed, you stop asking the people who profit from shadows for flashlights. His face did something unfamiliar and honest. Full access. Communications related to Daewin. I'll sign it. And if my team gets our office destroyed in the process, a humorless huff, we'll find you a sturdier chair. On the way back to Whitmore, his signature already in her inbox, Naomi watched the city's windows strobe by. Offices stacked like promises. She thought of her grandmother's hands guiding hers over Hangul vowels. Language is how you see the other person, not just how you say yourself. The hospital smell clung, so did the admission. A man who'd built an empire of glass had found a room where he could say I was wrong. The basement door hung crooked on its hinge when she arrived, like a mouth after a punch. Inside, drawers were yanked like teeth, the monitors spider-webbed out from impacts. The corkboard lay face down, tacks spilled like confetti. No one wanted. Across the wall, spray paint in red. Stay silent. Maid. Hugo Siaf clicked. Tamara said one low word that had traveled the world with military families. Diana's hands shook once and then went still, the way a barista does when the milk screams unexpectedly. Drive? Hugo asked. Naomi tapped her bag. On me. She stepped closer to the wall. The red glare. They think this scares us more than it confirms we're hitting something tender. Security took photos and shrugged in paragraphs. System upgrade. Cameras down. Bad timing. File a ticket. Graham came down. Removed his jacket like apology. He took in the red letters. Throat working. This ends, he said, not loudly. Now. He sent an email titled with the only good 4 words left in corporate life. You have full access. Naomi forwarded the credential dump to Hugo. The room hummed as if wires remembered how to purr. They worked like people who know time is breathing on their necks. The 5 memos had left the basement 2 hours before the wreckage. Now they traced their paths like forensic linguists pulling prints off water glasses. Mint green dot semiconductors went where they expected, through communications, up to a folder touched by Derek Vaughan at 3:17 p.m., then forwarded to an address that did not appear in any directory, but was very much inside the building. A workstation, assigned to an assistant whose travel photos showed alpine lakes, and a caption in German dialect so regional it made professors smile. Brennan, Tamara said softly. She had scheduled him for years. She knew who he fetched coffee for at 4:01 p.m. That workstation pinged an outbound to an onion-routed address that resolved into a domain belonging to Meridian Consulting. Attached, the mint green memo, and a note in German so formal, it sounded like it wore a vest. Opportunity to pivot narrative, possibly expansion levers semiconductors. That's our leak, Hugo said, eyes alight and grim. And his bridge, Naomi scrolled further, saw a pattern that made her stomach drop. Forward, reply. Forward again. Each line with a dollar amount in a separate, encrypted channel. The company's cybersecurity had never seen, because it wasn't looking for messages that hid in punctuation. The subject line, Operation Reset, had been rendered in safe-looking abbreviations, OP, R, set. Once, in a bold moment, reset. Someone had gotten confident. Stock manipulation, Diana said, voice flat. She pointed at a graph. Hugo pulled up a petite bloom of shorts gathered in the weeks when rumors of Daewin's exit made reporters hungry. Derek feeds Meridian. Meridian feeds competitors and the markets, Naomi said. They drive the stock down, step in with a savior story, and buy the company that was just taught how to kneel. Tamara pressed her palms to the desk, felt the roughness where a gouge cut the veneer. We can take this to the board. Today, They'll stall, Naomi said. He'll call it a witch hunt and ask for a third-party review, and then watch the evidence evaporate one memo at a time. So we smoke him out, Hugo said. Make him move in real time while everyone is watching. Naomi's eyes went to the busted monitor, its shattered surface catching the fluorescent light like ice on a lake about to crack. Her reflection looked like someone who'd forgotten how to lose on purpose. We do a webcast, she said, a public talk, language and power in global deals. Not about Whitmore. Ostensibly, midway through, we reference Operation Reset without naming it. In a phrase only someone who's reading our traps would recognize, we embed a request disguised as a proverb in 5 languages. He won't be able to resist signaling his contact. And while you talk, Tamara said, catching the beat, security traces the signal path. We capture the exfiltration in the act. No spin. We'll need the cyber boys upstairs. Hugo said, the ones who like acronyms more than nouns. I'll get Graham, Naomi said. She dialed when he answered. She didn't preface. We have your mole's hand on our paper, she said, and his glove on Meridian's doorknob. I want to force him to show his face. He listened. The silence was not doubt. It was calculation at a speed rarely seen in nature. Do it, he said. Name the hour. 3 p.m. tomorrow. We'll need a war room. You have mine, he said. And Naomi. She waited. I'm sorry about your office. We'll paint over it, she said, with primers they don't make anymore. After the call, the room shifted into the kind of choreography that, when it works, feels like grace, and when it doesn't, feels like drowning. Diana drafted slides that looked like philosophy, but hid requests as barcodes. Hugo coordinated with cybersecurity, explaining the trap in words they pretended not to respect, but immediately admired. Tamara built a run of show so tight you could bounce a quarter off it. Naomi went home for a suit she'd worn once. To a funeral that fit like resolve. She opened the cabinet to grab a mug and saw the square again. Yellow stubbornness lit by kitchen light. No more invisible. A promise, a threat, a refrain. She slept in 30-minute pieces, woke to a city morning that smelled like steam and ambition. At Whitmore, the war room filled with screens and men who said things like packet sniff and latency window without blushing. Graham stood in shirt sleeves, tea rolled, looking like somebody who'd stayed up in a hospital and decided not to be a coward anymore. At 2:59 p.m., Naomi stood behind a lectern in a studio with white walls and a camera that considered her. Lights warmed her cheeks. A small red dot waited to become a sun. 2 minutes. A producer said, voice soft in her ear, breathe. She thought of the phone in the executive lounge, of a voice from Seoul speaking too fast for English apologists, of a grandmother's hands and basil leaves and spray paint that couldn't spell dignity. She thought, language is how you see the other person. Then she looked straight into the lens and saw a man who liked to watch people talk, thinking no one was watching him type. Live in 5. The producer said, 4, 3. Naomi smiled the way you do when telling the truth is about to break something. 2, 1. The red tally light bloomed, and Naomi let the studio silence steady into a metronome. The lens was a single dark pupil. Inside it, 1,000 eyes she could not see. Good afternoon, she began, voice level, diction clean. Today we're talking about language as infrastructure, how words carry voltage across cultures without burning the house down. On the backstage monitor, the chat window started to ripple, greetings in English, Spanish, Korean, a wave of flags like an electronic parade. Diana's slides appeared map gray, with sharp, unfussy typography. Tamara's run of show ticked in Naomi's peripheral vision. Hugo stood in the war room upstairs, shoulder to shoulder with cybersecurity. A small army of knuckles on keyboards, Graham watched with his arms crossed, jaw locked, as if a different surgery were happening here, one for a company's clogged artery. Naomi moved through the first third with the practiced calm of someone setting down breakable truths on a satin cloth. She demonstrated how a single modal verb, should versus shall, could move money. She translated a gesture into 3 outcomes. She kept her hands still, her breaths long. Then she shifted. "We often speak about miscommunication as an accident," she said, letting hair vowels lengthen, letting the room lean in, when in fact it is sometimes a strategy. When trust is compromised, bad actors invent a vocabulary to make the damage sound like weather. Slide, a neutral diagram of signal, noise, interference. Behind it, in ghost text, only a trained eye would notice, nestled a phrase in 5 languages, a proverb bent 1 degree. Roosters crow differently before a storm. The German carried a regional inflection. The Zulu used a legal term that did not belong in a barnyard. The French tucked a whisper of urgency. The Korean wore an honorific that belonged to equals, not subordinates. The English was beautifully boring. In the war room, a cybersecurity analyst with a buzz cut leaned toward the screen. "She just said the thing," he murmured. "Listening," Hugo said, headphones cocked off one ear. His monitor pulsed with internal telemetry. Packet flows, viewed as rivers, ports as doors. "Come on, you careful little spider." Naomi, sometimes the cleanest way to fix a broken bridge is to get the saboteur to step on it while the camera is rolling. She told the story of a hypothetical corporation. No names, almost losing a deal to its own hubris. While she spoke, she threaded the bait again. Operation Reset, she never said. Instead, she mentioned resetting operations and, without turning her head, Joseph K-level bureaucrat speak in German that only a certain parochial ear would hear as marching orders. In Zulu, her anecdote included a legalism that said, "Now, now, not later." A red spike jumped on the cyber feed. "Got a beacon," someone said. "Executive wing, not Derek's box. Brennan." Tamara whispered from the back of the war room, reading the asset tag off the dashboard. Old habits. She could locate assistants faster than fire exits. On screen, Naomi smiled slightly, as if at a private joke only the patient would get. "When you build a shared glossary," she said, "suddenly the weather has fingerprints." Another spike. Outbound traffic tunneled through a proxy that thought it could hold water. Hugo walked the flow with 2 fingers, as if tracing a creek on a paper map. "He's sending a heads up." German, same dialect as the earlier packets. "Can we see who's at the keyboard?" Graham asked. "Cameras on that corridor are—" "Oh, come on," the cyber lead said, then grinned. "There's a ceiling cam in the print alcove that's on a different VLAN. Bless the vendor sloppiness." He pulled a low-res grayscale window into view. A figure leaned into a terminal, shoulders tense, hairline familiar. Brennan Wright, Derek's assistant, the polite ghost from 100 calendar negotiations. "And there's our second config." Hugo pointed at a faint watermark in the memo on Brennan's screen, the mint green dot, blown up to a pixelated moon. "He's forwarding the semicon rumor." "Destination?" Graham asked. The cyber lead's hands tap-danced. "Relayed to an onion root, then to a domain parked behind a wall in the Caymans. Cross-checking with OSINT, Meridian Consulting, Secure Portal." Graham's mouth tightened. Zadi, watching from the corner, muttered, "He, Meridian," under her breath. On the broadcast, Naomi took questions. She let one aggressive query. "Is this just woke branding for bad managers?" Hang on the hook a second too long, then reeled it in with a smile. "If humility is branding," she said, "we're in stranger trouble than I thought." The chat roared with supportive emojis like confetti from a less cynical planet. Then she lowered her voice half a register. "Before we close," she said, "a note for those who prefer code to conversation. When you see a crowing that sounds like thunder, check the barn door for a lawyer. You'll find the weather pattern you're looking for." In the war room, 3 screens lit at once: outbound pings from Brennan's terminal, an inbound from a burner phone ID'd to a prepaid kiosk 2 blocks from Meridian's offices, and, most crucially, a reply routed back into the building from a device registered to the communications executive suite. "Source?" Graham asked, already knowing. "Internal node," the cyber lead said. "Southwest corner, floor 42. That's Derek's suite." Tamara finished. The reply packet carried a short German phrase typed with impatience: "Proceed." It would have been nothing to a layperson. To Hugo, it was a vocal fingerprint. The same clipped bit and anachronistic umlaut style from the earlier encrypted trove, save every frame. Naomi said over comm, though she wasn't in the room. It felt like she was. "Anyway, hash the packets, print to PDF, and burn to worm storage. Assume litigation." "Already on it," the cyber lead said, and you could hear the small, curled smile that comes when you get to do your job at full power. Naomi closed the broadcast with a story about a factory worker whose ideas rusted under a leaking roof. She didn't say the name. She didn't have to. "Look where the water is," she said, looking straight down the lens, "and you'll find the weakness in the ceiling." She thanked the audience. The red light went dark. Applause doesn't happen in a live stream studio. Instead, adrenaline lands in the chest, like an extra heartbeat. Naomi stepped back from the lectern, exhale long, hands suddenly cold. In the war room, the mood shifted from hunt to harvest. "We have enough," Hugo said softly, as if afraid to scare the evidence. "We have more than enough." "Chain of custody?" Graham asked. "Logged," Tamara replied, handing him a printout that still smelled like toner. "Timestamps, sign-offs, screen caps, packet hashes. We can brief the board before Derek briefs the press." "Eleanor will call an emergency session," Graham said, reaching for his phone. His voice had found a new gear, still iron, less varnish. He paused and looked at Naomi on the studio monitor, now rolling her shoulders, alone under cooling lights. "Bring her up," he said. She arrived with a technician trailing her, raw halo from the LEDs fading. Graham met her at the threshold with a look that contained an apology, a thanks, and an unspoken, "Let's finish this. We have him in the act," he said. "Him and his bridge. Him and his bridge are going to scream witch hunt." Naomi said, "We'll need to show work like we're teaching math." "Already building the deck," Tamra said, because of course she was. Saadi slid in, winded from 2 flights of stairs. "I put a pin in Meridian's social team," she said. "They're warming up a statement about industry-standard information exchange. Translation: we got caught, and we're going to call it networking." "Let them," Naomi replied. "We'll redefine industry standard on the record." They moved like a platoon who'd learned each other's stride. The boardroom was prepped in 30 minutes. Screens arranged, chairs squared, water bottles aligned with the mild fascism of corporate hospitality. Eleanor Blackwell arrived with 2 other directors and the company's general counsel, an owl-eyed woman named Rains, whose pupils never missed a comma. "Mr. Whitmore," Eleanor said, cool as glassware. Ms. Carter, you've called an emergency. Let's see if it lives up to its name. It does, Graham said and gestured to Hugo. The presentation was not theater. It was forensic poetry. Hugo laid the memos side by side, circled the barnyard proverb variants, zoomed on the mint green dot until it looked like a crater on the moon. The cyber lead narrated the live trace with an economy that made police procedurals feel bloated. Time, node, packet, route, destination, reply. Tamara provided context like a metronome. Who Brennan was, who Derek was to him, who Meridian was to both. Rains the council stopped them twice. Back up, she said, finger tapping. Chain of custody here. They backed up, she nodded. Continue. When the Meridian portal appeared on screen, she didn't blink. We'll need to file for preservation, she said, already drafting the motion in her head. I expect Mr. Vaughn will say this is fabricated, Eleanor said at last, hands steepled, or that it is standard practice. As Ms. Marrow suggests, Naomi stepped forward, not to the head of the table, but to its middle, the way you do when you want the geometry to argue for democracy. We don't need adjectives, she said evenly. We have verbs: send, receive, proceed. Every one of them points to a single corridor and an outside firm with a motive. And if you doubt the motive, watch your own stock chart when a rumor leaks. Graham exhaled a breath that might have been sitting in him since the hospital. Eleanor looked at Rains. Rains nodded once. I'm comfortable moving to suspension pending full review, she said. But if you want him to hang himself, you might prefer he walk into this meeting certain he can win. Self-destruction is more persuasive than prosecution, Eleanor mused. Then, to Graham, invite Mr. Vaughn and Mr. Wright. Do not tell them what they're about to see. Graham sent the summons. While they waited, the room held a quiet that felt like the pause between lightning and thunder. Naomi dropped her gaze to the table's glossy wood, saw her reflection, and, beyond it, her grandmother's kitchen table's scuff. Honest, she put both palms down, cool surface against warm skin, and thought of basil leaves and spray paint and a ceiling camera on a rogue VLAN. Brennan entered first, clutching a notebook like a flotation device. Derek followed, immaculate, a cologne cloud refusing to share oxygen. He wore disappointment like cufflinks. You rang, he said to Eleanor, then let his eyes skate over Naomi with a smile sharp enough to slice. And you brought the influencer. Sit, Eleanor said, and Derek sat, smirk adjusting by a millimeter. Rains clicked the first slide. For the next 6 minutes, Derek watched a trap describe itself. At minute 4, his posture stiffened. At minute 5, color climbed his neck. At minute 6, he laughed once short, derisive, a gambler folding a losing hand loudly to distract from the stack he'd already lost. This is nonsense, he said. Anyone can Photoshop a watermark. We didn't, Rains replied, bland as glass. And the packet captures are not Photoshop. Derek turned on Brennan with the old, ugly intimacy of a master and a servant who'd learned each other's weaknesses. You forwarded these. From my office. Brennan's eyes flicked to Naomi, just a flicker, a confession, and a plea. In his face, a small war, ambition kneecapped by dread. Naomi didn't look away. She did not nod, but she allowed an expression that said, clearly, you are not invisible here either. Choose what you want to be seen for. Brennan inhaled, a breath that might change a life. He told me it was industry standard competitive intelligence. He said, voice unsteady but audible. He said Meridian was a vendor. He said, Derek's chair scraped. Careful, he hissed. He said the market would correct Whitmore's arrogance. Brennan finished. almost surprised to have reached the end of the sentence. Thunder. Finally, Eleanor's gavel, a small, ceremonial thing no one had touched in years, met wood. Mr. Vaughn. Mr. Wright, she said, tone legal. You are suspended pending investigation. Security will escort you while legal locks access and preserves devices. Derek stood slowly, smile back in place like a mask reaffixed. He leaned forward on his knuckles, looked from Naomi to Graham, and whispered, meant to be heard. You two have no idea how many friends I have. Naomi held his gaze. Friends don't help you when the ceiling falls, she said. They just get wet with you. Security appeared in the doorway, soft shoes on soft carpet. Brennan walked out between them with his eyes on the floor. Derek followed, shoulders squared in a parody of dignity. When the door closed, nobody spoke for a beat. Somewhere, down in a basement that still smelled faintly of fresh paint and a threat, a taped square in a drawer said, "No more invisible," and meant it. Eleanor turned to Naomi. "Prepare a statement," she said, "and then prepare for war." Naomi nodded once. The company hummed under her feet, like a machine that had finally noticed the mechanic standing in the room. She did not smile. She did not celebrate. She reached for the next thing that needed doing and spoke the line her grandmother had loved. Half prayer, half warning. Let's see what the weather really is. By morning, the building had a pulse. News alerts drummed against the glass like rain. Phones vibrated themselves into a tremor. Sadie's team turned conference room B into a press bunker, cables coiled like sleeping snakes, tripods sprouting in rows, lights warming up to surgical brightness. Downstairs, the red paint on the basement wall had been rolled flat beneath primer, snowy and stubborn. The ghost of the letters still visible if you squinted. Naomi wrote the statement at the same battered desk where the threat had been sprayed. Legal at her shoulder like a lighthouse beam. Short, Rhinus said. Not cute, not inflamed. Facts. Verbs. A spine. Naomi nodded, fingers hovering above the keys. She wanted to put everything in every corridor, every whisper, but the frame had to hold. She typed, "We identified irregularities in internal communications related to an international partnership. We created controlled variants to trace leaks. We captured live transmissions from a company terminal to an external portal and received a confirming reply from an executive suite. The individuals involved have been suspended pending investigation. We will cooperate fully with regulators. Our international partner has been briefed and remains engaged." She paused, looked at the last line as if it might shatter, then added, "We failed to listen soon enough. We are listening now." Rains read it once, twice, a third time. "Keep it," she said. "It will make a certain kind of man angry. That's how you know it worked." Upstairs, the boardroom became a stage. Eleanor Blackwell presided with a decanter's calm. Graham faced the cameras flanked by Rains and an empty chair where silence sat like a dignitary. Naomi stood off to the side with Sadie, earpiece tucked, pulse steady, only because she ordered it to be. Graham's voice found a center it hadn't recently visited. "We made mistakes," he said. "We confused credentials with competence. We protected hierarchy at the expense of ability. That stops now." He outlined the suspensions, the investigation, the cooperation with regulators. The stock ticker at the bottom of the live feed bobbed like a gull on storm chop. When he finished, he didn't reach for spin. He reached for structure, effective immediately. He continued, "We are establishing an interim leadership council representing multiple levels of the company. It will include Ms. Carter, whose team uncovered the breach, and leaders from operations, HR, and security. I will step back from day-to-day operations for 90 days, while this council implements reform. A murmur rippled the room, disbelief, hungry approval. The click of recalibration. Eleanor's gaze flickered sideways. Surprised, and then just for an instant, almost pleased. Questions came like thrown marbles. Is this a PR stunt? Are you scapegoating senior executives? Why is a custodian involved in leadership decisions? Rains took the legal ones with the patience of granite. Graham absorbed the rest, like body blows, and stayed on his feet. Then a reporter in a blue blazer said the quiet part out loud. Where is Ms. Moose? Carter. Does she speak, or does the company speak for her? Graham looked toward the wing. Naomi stepped into the lights. They were warmer than she expected, the kind that makes sweat a metaphor. Microphones angled like curious birds. I'll keep this brief, she said. I don't like podiums. They're just desks with delusions. A laugh, startled and grateful, moved through the rows. I'm not here to be a mascot, she continued. I'm here to do the job. My team is already doing translate reality into choices. People can actually make people before the damage is expensive. A hand shot up. Ms. Carter, you were arrested 3 years ago at a protest. Does that history make you unsuitable for leadership? There it was clean as a blade. Naomi didn't blink. I was arrested at a demonstration supporting funding for indigenous language preservation, she said. The resisting charge was dropped. The disorderly conduct stayed. What I learned that day is what I practice now. When systems don't listen, people raise their voices. We're building a system that listens before it has to be shouted at. Cameras clicked. A metal applause. Eleanor's mouth softened. Rains didn't smile, but her eyes did. They left the podium to the weather of commentary. Within an hour, Meridian Consulting issued a statement written by a team of lawyers and one poet on retainer. We categorically deny any improper conduct. We engage in industry-standard information exchanges consistent with best practices. The network chyrons interpreted this into simpler language. We didn't do it. And if we did, you all do it too. Then Derek played his card. A glossy business blog posted an exclusive Naomi's mugshot from 3 years ago, propped to make the fluorescent lighting cruel, alongside a headline engineered in a lab for virality. From maid to mastermind, Whitmore's new power broker has a record. The comments section did what comments sections do. Security forwarded 2 messages with specifics to Rains. She filed 3 motions before lunch and called the platform's counsel by their first name. Naomi went quiet, the way a lake goes still before a storm. She found a corner of the building where the carpet was old enough to have opinions, and leaned against the wall until the hum of the HVAC sounded like waves. Her phone wouldn't stop vibrating. She put it face down and stared at the little rectangle of yellow paper in her palm, the one from her drawer. The one she touched when the building felt carnivorous, no more invisible. It steadied like a hand on the shoulder. Her ringtone cut through, a number with a country code she recognized. Miss Carter, said a voice rich with the cadence of soul and the weight of authority. It's Junhui, Daewon Group. She stood straighter. Her eyes found the window and the skyline beyond it, a field of glass catching a late blaze of sun. You have the gratitude of my chairman, Junhui said, switching to English that carried more music than most men's. And my own, he asks that you be part of all future discussion. He also asks that you remember to sleep. Naomi let out a breath she hadn't admitted she was holding. We will make this right. We, Junhui repeated, pleased. One more thing. An invitation will come today from the United Nations Global Business Forum. They would like you to speak about cross-cultural intelligence. I told them you don't enjoy podium, a smile in the sentence. They said, you can bring a chair. She laughed, the sound loosening a knot behind her ribs. Thank you. For the chair, that evening, the city's night air smelled like neon and steam. Naomi turned her key in her apartment door and knew it had been opened before. The lock yielded too easily. Inside, things looked the way a house does after someone has been careful not to care. Couch cushion askew, a drawer not quite shut, a faint line of dust where a frame had hung too long. Her grandmother's Korean primer, linen-bound, margins full of a handwriting half cursive, half hinged, lay on the floor with its spine cracked. The pages had been torn and taped together again by a hand that believed tape could fix anything. Now the tape curled like old leaves. The cover was scuffed. One page was missing. The absence felt like a mouth. Next to it, a Polaroid face down. She turned it over. Two women in a kitchen, one older, hair pinned, jaw set with mischief. One younger, eyes trying to be older, hand ink-stained, a basil plant in a chipped teacup on the sill, leaves shaped like a promise. Enga, rose like heat, pure as a brand, not the kind that eats the room, the kind that clarifies. She sat on the floor, the primer in her lap, and let herself cry exactly 3 tears. After the third, she stood up and called security. Then Rains. Then Graham. They came into my home, she said, voice level. Are you safe? Graham asked, now automatic with the right first question. Yes, she said, and realized the word was true, because she intended it to be. Then tomorrow, he said, we burn the daylight out of them. She put the primer back on the shelf gently. A relic returned to a reliquary. She took the Polaroid with her. The next morning, Brennan Wright requested a private meeting through a third-party Sadie's friend in HR, who collected secrets the way others collected sneakers. They met in the back of a long-ignored archive room where old file boxes smelled like paper and dust and chance. Brennan looked 10 years older and 5 pounds lighter. He set his phone on the table, screen black, both hands visible cop show protocol. I was told it was standard, he said, eyes fixed on a point somewhere near his shoes. That's how he sold it. Industry standard. He said I was ambitious. He said I could be more than an assistant if I learned to do this kind of work. And did you? Naomi asked, not unkind. For a minute, he said, admitting a small and terrible truth. It felt like I could see corridors, others couldn't. Then the corridors started to look like tunnels. He slid a flash drive across the table. I exported the message history with Meridian. They used a separate channel for the financial side. Password is the year Meridian was incorporated backwards. Because of course it is. Why are you doing this? Naomi asked. The basil-scented kitchen in the Polaroid hung in her mind like a different life. He swallowed. Because I don't want to be the kind of man who says, industry standard, when he means my soul has a price. Also because I am going to lose my job, and possibly more, and I would like it to mean something. You'll need counsel, she said. Not ours. He nodded. I wrote a resignation. It's clumsy. I never had to write one before. You'll write better things, she said, and meant it. He left with his shoulders a little higher. The gray in him had shifted a shade. By noon, the flash drive had been copied twice and sealed in envelopes with signatures bleeding onto the edges. Rains began drafting letters to agencies whose acronyms could put handcuffs on people. The board scheduled another emergency session. Meridian's statement grew adjectives like barnacles. The invitation from the UN arrived on cream paper that felt expensive enough to have a conscience. Keynote: Beyond Translation Building Cultural Intelligence in Global Business. Naomi laid it on her desk and placed the Polaroid on top. 2 women in a kitchen, a basil plant alive, a world where patience was a profession. That afternoon, Graham called another press conference. This one shorter and sharper. "We have provided materials to the appropriate authorities," he said. "We will not litigate in public, but we will not be silent." Then he did the thing Naomi had told him would taste like vinegar and work like medicine. He apologized, not for the crime that belonged to others, but for the culture that made it imaginable. After the cameras went cold, he turned to Naomi. "If I were 25, he said, "I would have tried to hire you and then resented you when you told me what to do. At 52, I don't have time for that. Help me rewire this place." "You'll lose people," she said. "Some you like." "We're already losing people I pretended to like," he replied. "I prefer the new variety." They worked into evening. Sadie mapped a communications plan that didn't pander or strut. Tamara rewrote onboarding processes to include a unit called How to Listen Without Waiting to Speak. Hugo built a dashboard that turned translation errors into red flags, visible to anyone with enough curiosity to click. In the basement, now bright, with new paint and a second-hand rug, Diana swore had good karma. Naomi hung a cheap corkboard and pinned to it one item, the yellow square, no more invisible. On her way out, she stopped in the lobby. The night guard, Frank, hat tilted, coffee steaming, raised 2 fingers in greeting, the quiet kind that says, "You shared a building at ungodly hours, and that counts for more than most people know." "Busy day," he said. "They all are," she answered. "World's watching," he said, like it was a weather report. "It should," she replied. "We've been reciting the wrong forecast." Outside, the city breathed in blue and sodium. A bus sighed to a stop. A couple argued about a movie with the tenderness of people who would make up by dessert. Naomi checked the sky for stars and remembered you only see them when the streetlights fail or you look hard enough past the glare. Her phone chimed a text from an unknown number with a country code she now knew by heart. "Bring the basil photo to New York. Your grandmother is my grandmother too," it said, signed with a name and an honorific that landed delicately in her chest. At her apartment, she watered the plant that had somehow survived on her sill through neglect and headlines. She taped the cracked primer's spine with new tape, not to pretend it wasn't broken, but to promise it would be held. She set the Polaroid in her bag. Then she sat at her tiny table and began to write the keynote. She wrote it in English and underlined 3 sentences in Korean, circled a line in Zulu legalese, because it made her grin, and put a parenthetical in French that she would probably remove because it was smug and she liked it too much. She wrote a paragraph about men who confuse glass with honesty, and another about women who pronounce shall like a lifeline. She wrote the last line first. "Look where the water is, and build the roof from there." When the page looked like a city map, avenues, alleys, a river drawn in blue ink, she closed her notebook. Outside, Esiansaihe, then faded. She switched off the light and stood by the window for a moment, the dark pressing like velvet against the glass. In the building across the way, someone practiced a piano piece. Wrong notes. Learning to be right. Naomi smiled in the dark, which is its own kind of vow. Tomorrow would bring subpoenas and statements and a flight booked under a name the world now knew. She was tired. She was ready. The city blinked. Somewhere downtown, a camera light glowed red. Somewhere uptown, a podium waited. Somewhere between, a ceiling remembered it could leak or shelter, depending on the hands that built it. She looked at the Polaroid once more, at the basil in the chipped cup, at a history that felt like a handoff. Then she set her alarm, left the window, and let sleep finally find her a sleep that smelled faintly of paper and paint, and the sharp, clean promise of coming rain. The green room smelled like curling irons and nerves. Beyond the curtain, the United Nations Hall thrummed a low, international murmur, dozens of languages stacking like harmonies on a folding table, a glass of water sweating into a coaster, a bowl of sad grapes, her name on a card, heavy enough to pass as a promise. A single chair waited on stage beside the podium, upholstery, the color of a well-reasoned memo. Naomi rolled the stiff shoulder of her best jacket and touched the taped spine of the primer in her bag. Then the Polaroid. She could feel her grandmother's thumbprint in the gloss, though, of course, that was only memory. Saadi petted over in soft-soled heels, headpiece crooked like a crown that had decided to be practical. "How's the weather?" Zadie asked. "Partly cloudy," Naomi said. "Chance of verbs." Hugo ducked his head into the doorway, tie askew like a flag that had fought wind. "Rain says regulators filed preservation orders on Meridian at 8. Ling Si," he whispered. "There's a press scrum outside their midtown office big enough to block a bus." "Any new leaks?" Naomi asked. "Only from Meridian's waterline," Tamara murmured, appearing like a lighthouse. "A pipe burst on the first floor." Literal. The metaphor unionized. They all smiled like fighters who knew how to joke because they'd done the homework. Junhui slipped in last, immaculate and somehow uncreased by time zones. He held out a small object wrapped in rice paper. "A talisman," he said, for steady speech. Inside, a tiny wooden carving. Two cranes beak to beak. Grain running like river lines. Balance. Flight. The exactness of hand tools. "Gam sahamnida," Naomi said, and the bow in her neck felt like an amen. The stage manager counted down with fingers. 3, 2, 1 lights up and applause like a wide-open door. Naomi walked into the beam and sat in the chair to make a point. The podium glowered. "Harmless. Thank you," she began, mic warm against her collarbone. "I was told I could bring a chair." A ripple of laughter. Pressure dropped a degree. "We talk about language as if it were furniture, something you slide into a room to make it look finished," she said. "But language is wiring. It carries current, and when you strip the insulation, things burn." She moved without hurrying. She didn't tell them the whole war. She gave them one skirmish at a time and made each one matter. She showed a slide with 2 emails identical, except for a single honorific, and then showed the price of that syllable in a red number that made 2 diplomats flinch. She described how shall can be a rope ladder or a noose. She told them about men who call hierarchy process, and women who learn to pronounce no like a sentence, and yes like a decision. Her phone buzzed once in her pocket, a haptic mosquito. She ignored it. "When trust breaks," she said, "we pretend it's the weather. Unavoidable. It isn't. Somebody left a roof unattended." She let the image land, a ceiling stain spreading slow as a rumor. Halfway through, a moderator slipped a card onto the small table beside her. Eyes apologetic. Naomi glanced down. "Breaking. Meridian execs subpoenaed." Vaughn named in accompanying letter. The paper held a faint, oily fingerprint. Who knows whose? And something like relief slid along her ribs. Not victory. Just a corner of the tarp finally pinned. She didn't mention it. She didn't need to. Screens in laps glowed like a new species of moth. The hall's hush thickened as notifications detonated silently in 100 handbags. She kept her hands folded and her sentences unafraid. "In my line of work," she said, "you get asked to translate after the damage. My team is trying to move translation to the front of the blueprint. We ask, where does the water go? Who owns the buckets? Who gets blamed? when the carpet smells like mold? The first question from the floor came from a man with a face like a confident handshake. Isn't this all elaborate? Don't mark it self-correct. Mark it's correct like rivers, Naomi said. They'll find the lowest point if you carve it. The question is, who's holding the shovel? Another question, pricklier. What do you say to executives who fear that empowering non-traditional voices undermines expertise? She didn't blink at the quotation marks that had sounded, even though he hadn't made them. I say, define expertise. If you mean the ability to read a room faster than a transcript, to grasp the weight of an apology in the grammar of a culture, to hear the difference between with and over, then you should be terrified of people like me having power, because we'll use it. Laughter, real and startled. Someone clapped. It grew. When a reporter from a tabloid asked about her arrest, she didn't sigh. She didn't stiffen. Protest taught me a thing executives hate to learn, she said. Listening is cheaper than riot police. The hall hummed the way good rooms hum when a truth passes over. She could see Graham in the second row, sitting straighter than he had any right to with the weight he carried. Eleanor further back, expression an expensive blank broken at the edges by the ghost of respect. Rains, motionless and kind of terrifying, texting like a surgeon suturing. Her last line she'd written first, at her kitchen table with the plant and the siren, and the city refusing to sleep. She spoke it without looking at notes. Look where the water is, she said. Build the roof from there. Silence. Then a wave of sound that felt like tide, less applause than assent. Naomi stood, not because one stands at the end, but because sitting any longer would have meant staying small. She bowed her head once, not humble, just precise. And the light eased. Backstage, air returned like mercy. Sadie hugged her hard enough to fix posture. Hugo bumped her shoulder. Engineer to engineer. Tamara pressed a hand to her forearm, the way people do when they're saying, we can go farther. Junhui didn't speak. He placed his palm over his heart and inclinated his head. And that was heavier than words. Graham waited a step away. The way people wait when they've learned not to enter the intimacy of a victory they did not earn. That was clean, he said. Clean roofs don't leak. She answered. His phone vibrated, and he glanced down. Derek's counsel is on television, he said dryly, calling your methods entrapment. Entrapment is when you build a trap, Rhinus said, appearing like a verdict. We built a bridge, and he tried to use it to push us into the river. She turned to Naomi. U.S. Attorney's office wants a meeting Monday. Bring Brennan. He'll need whistleblower counsel. I have a name. Naomi nodded. The idea of Brennan hands visible, confession like a room he'd decided to exit, brought the same complicated tenderness as the Polaroid. A man trying to change the color of his gray. Outside, the sky put on the dusk like a well-cut suit. The East River looked exactly like a metaphor, fast, reflective, carrying other people's trash with alarming grace. Naomi stood on the esplanade and let wind salt her face. The cranes in her pocket, that tiny, patient carving made a warm weight against her palm. Graham joined her. Tea loosened, the bravado drained, and replaced with something steadier. My father watched the live stream, he said. He texted me 2 words. About time. Oh, please. Naomi smiled without looking away from the water. He has an editor's teeth. He does, Graham said. I'm thinking of keeping them in this company. He took a breath that had more future in it than air. The council will extend past 90 days. If you'll have it, I'll have it, she said. On condition. He raised an eyebrow. We build a public center, she said, not a basement lab. Glass walls, training for anyone with a library card, fellowships for people who learned diplomacy, serving coffee, and carrying mail. We show our work. He didn't answer at once. Then, find a building. I already found one, she said, and smiled because she had. Her phone buzzed again. Unfamiliar number, a flag she could not see. She answered. A voice poured into her ear, warm vowels, consonants she couldn't yet place. The musical uncertainty of someone hoping to be understood. She listened. I don't speak your language yet, she said gently, when the caller finally paused, but I'd like to learn, can we find someone to help us talk? The voice female, maybe 60, with a laugh that sounded like wooden spoons, made a relieved noise and tried again. Slower. Naomi caught 3 words this time and wrote them on the back of her hand as if ink could turn intention into competence. She promised to call back with a translator. She hung up. Graham watched her. You don't have to take calls like that, he said softly. I will, she said. One day we'll build a system that catches them before they have to find me. They walked back toward the building with the flags. The marble lobby was colder than the river, brighter than reason, ceiling higher than the future. A damp circle stained the corner tile somebody had tracked the outside in. Above, a tiny discoloration marked the edge of a panel where a long-ago leak had tried to teach a lesson. Naomi looked up at it and thought of tape and primers and promises. Sadie's phone chimed. A push alert. The kind that travels faster than apologies. Meridian COO resigns amid probe. Another. Insider trading allegations expand. The world moved in decimals and headlines, while real people took off their badges and went home to kitchens, where Basil either lived or didn't. Brennan texted. I told my mother. She asked if I was going to jail. I said I was going to tell the truth. She made soup. Naomi typed back. Keep the soup hot. We'll need it. On the flight home that night, the city fell away like a peeled sticker. Naomi turned the Polaroid over and wrote on the blank white in small, neat script. Look where the water is. She tucked it back into the primer. The missing page was still missing. She let it be missing. Translation is never complete. Sometimes a gap is honest. She slept with her mouth open and did not dream. When the wheels hit tarmac, her phone filled with weather, invitations, threats dressed as questions, questions dressed as compliments. She silenced most of them and sent one message to an address that began with press and ended with a company that used to be immune to shame. We'll meet you in court. She copied Raines. At the office, Morning had cleaned the windows. Frank at the front gave her a nod that carried more ceremony than a key to a city. In the basement that wasn't, she set the cranes on her desk, pinned a blank square to the corkboard beside No More Invisible, and wrote one word on it with a thick marker. Roof. Tamara slid in with a schedule. Hugo pinned up a network map with fewer red flares than last week. Sadie entered with coffee and trouble in equal measure. Graham arrived without fanfare and stood in the doorway like a man willing to be taught. Outside, the weather decided to be honest. It rained, straight down, no wind, the kind of rain that makes roofs prove it. Naomi went to the window and watched the glass bead and release, the pattern of a world that would try again. Later that afternoon, on her way to a meeting that would become a program, that would become an office with glass walls, she passed a janitor's closet door propped open by a mop bucket. She paused. Inside, the bright chemical smell of clean, a radio whispering a baseball game, a basil plant in a chipped mug on the shelf next to the bleach, green as a flag. She laughed once, softly, and moved on. By evening, the rain thinned to a silver thread. She stepped outside without an umbrella, face up, far above. A hairline crack in the cloud showed a blue so sharp it could cut. She thought of ceilings and rivers and cranes and chairs. She thought of a stranger's phone call and a missing page, and how both were invitations. She went back into work. On an upper floor, a newly patched section of drywall dried to a lighter shade. In the lobby, a drip gathered on the edge of a marble seam, swelled until it learned its own weight, and fell one clear drop. No stain, no damage, just the sound of a small thing doing what gravity asks, and a building ready this time to catch it.